Frustrations at the recurring issues surrounding IT procurement projects, with concerns like budget overruns, misconduct, improper contracting practices, have intensified scrutiny of government procurement. So, how will the government respond to gain back public trust? I, Paula, alongside my fellow Shared Service Canada working group members, Paige, Elaine, Fadia, Anshika, and Kyle, have designed a clearly scoped and practical plan for formal review and short-term action to take control of current projects. Next slide, please. Today's agenda will be delving into the issue, followed by an explanation of our objectives. We'll then introduce our review framework, explore potential policy options, and outline our plan for implementing our preferred policy option. Finally, we'll conclude with some closing remarks before moving into the question and answer phase. Next slide, please. Our working group at the SSC has been reviewing the case presented by the Treasury Board, and we have noted several core issues in government IT procurement across all departments, including SSC. Systemic issues within the procurement process has led to significant mismanagement, as seen in the ArriveCan investigation. The project cost around $54 million, with $19 million being paid to GC Strategies, whose principals subcontracted the work without notifying authorities. The principals also exaggerated their firm's qualifications, showing a lack of oversight in the contract. Transparency and accountability issues are plaguing the bidding, evaluation, and solicitation processes. In the Phoenix payroll system, the lack of a systematic framework to manage spending by IBM led to significant overruns, reaching 3,200% beyond the initial contract. The lack of transparency not only hinders fair competition, but also raises questions about the integrity of the procurement system. Also, ethics violations and anti-competitive practices have unfortunately become common. These practices not only result in federal procurement disasters, but also erode public trust in government operations. We believe that targeted, reactive, and proactive policies are needed to restore public opinion in federal operations and can halt further issues and losses associated with government procurement. Next slide, please. SSC was created by the federal government to modernize IT infrastructure across the Canadian public sector. So we believe that we are in the position to lead the government in a formal review and policy changes for IT procurement. We provide services related to cyber and IT security and purchasing of workplace technology devices, as well as offering other optional services to federal government organizations. As a back-facing department that does not interact with the public, we see ourselves as a risk-averse option for piloting policies that can be implemented to other departments. If we can solve issues with IT procurement within SSC, IT procurement can become more centralized, which can increase efficiency. Next slide, please. In creating our Tiger Team review framework and a short-term risk pooling policy to achieve immediate impact, we have employed 4 objectives to guide our decision-making process. First, we recognize the Treasury Board's need for transparency and accountability. Second, we aim to maximize innovation and efficiencies through agile acquisition. Third, making sure our review policies are feasible for stakeholders in government is critical. And lastly, we seek to increase public opinion in the government's capacity to manage IT procurement by focusing on short-term outcomes. I now pass it to my colleague Fadia, the ADM of Enterprise IT Procurement, to run through our Tiger Team formal review. Next slide, please.
Our strategy focuses on putting together a Tiger Team to conduct a formal review by leveraging existing federal reviews and Auditor General reports on procurement. Given the severity of the procurement scandals in the news right now, we need to mobilize fast and act now. Significant financial and human resource has already been poured into conducting wide-scale departmental reviews. What is needed now is not to start from scratch, but rather to combine existing federal knowledge and competencies. Tiger Teams comprise a group of experts who are brought together to solve a specific complex problem. just as a federal crisis that is facing the government's procurement right now. The Treasury Board Secretariat has also previously appointed and deployed multidisciplinary Tiger teams to solve several federal issues. We propose a Tiger team composed of internal departmental experts from RCMP, CBSA, ESDC, and PSPC. Our rationale for including these stakeholders is to bring in insights and knowledge from the procurement issues that these key players have observed within their internal processes. We also recommend an external independent facilitator to ensure an unbiased evaluation and an external EDI consultant in line with SSC's values. The formal review will be led by SSC's Chief of Audit and Evaluation Executive, but will abide by the guidelines of the Office of Procurement Ombudsman. The scope of the review will focus on examining the procurement system at large with a look at both the bidding and the monitoring processes within SSC, but have a specific look at the role of senior officials. Next slide, please. The timeline maps the execution of the formal review. While federal reviews tend to run for longer timelines, our solution proposes 3 months for the review. The rationale is simple. We require fast response to counter declining public confidence in federal operations. And secondly, as mentioned, this review is a meta-analysis of already existing audit reports. We're not starting from scratch to avoid further burdening federal expenses. As our focus is on optimizing federal resources, we also want to leverage our existing software competencies for this review. We recommend utilizing SSC's Teammate Plus software as part of the implementation. SSC collaborated with the Treasury Board Secretariat to implement this cloud-based solution. It is an internal audit and evaluation software, and the software has already completed a security assessment and received its authority to operate. A big element of the formal review is the communication piece, which will focus on the consolidation of a final report and the circulation of findings to both intra-departments and to the public. Next slide, please. Our formal review strategy has been devised for the federal government to conduct a holistic procurement review. However, as my colleague Paula mentioned, simply being reactive is not sufficient. The government needs to act now, and it is time to implement short-term proactive strategies in the interim while the review is in progress. Based on best practices across other jurisdictions, 3 federal procurement policies have been proposed: risk pooling, standardization of cost proposals during the bidding phase, and a penalty system. Now I will pass the floor to SSC's ADM of Service Innovation, Elaine, to walk you through why risk pooling is our preferred policy. Next slide, please.
Our first option is risk pooling. So for risk pooling, there will be a contractual agreement where cost overruns are pooled and shared between the contractors and the government. So this incentivizes companies to be more cost efficient and to go under the budget because all the cost savings will be pooled between them and the government. This also addresses the cost overrun problem we have because the cost overruns are pooled between the company and the government, so it discourages going over budget and actually encourages better cost management. So we will apply this to every contract that has not yet been signed. For contractors we're working with right now, we will offer them an incentive to opt in, an incentive to amend their existing contract. To encourage people who are working to participate, we will offer them 100% of the cost savings if they go under budget. If they go over budget, we will cover these costs like we have been doing already. This incentive mechanism will encourage them to stay within their budget and have better cost management. But this will only apply to contracts that have already been signed. Every other contract from this point, we will pool the cost overruns between the government and the contractor. So this policy would promote accountability, feasibility, and it gives us the short-term outcomes we want and have more efficient and effective working relationships with our contractors. It also promotes agile acquisition because it incentivizes efficiency and cost-effective practices for our contractors. Next slide, please. Our next option is standardizing cost proposals. Standardizing cost proposals means every supplier has to give clear, detailed, and consistent pricing information for transparency and fair competition. But we can't do reworking or have flexibility, so this might have some negative long-term effects that we don't really know about yet. It also doesn't completely make underbidding go away. And while standardizing the cost proposals promotes accountability and is a feasible idea, implementing this needs a lot of stakeholder consultation. And unlike our risk pooling option, standardizing cost proposals can't be applied to current contracts. So it doesn't give us the short-term immediate effects that we want. It also doesn't promote agile acquisition like risk pooling because standardizing something means it will be rigid and there isn't room for iterative changes and improving things. Next slide, please. Our last option is a financial penalty system, like what was used in some government projects already, where we penalize contractors for breaching contracts or like failing to meet deadlines and going over their budget. This isn't really a new concept because the CBSA actually follows the Administrative Monetary Penalty System or the AMP system, and it gives financial penalties for companies for regulation violations. This option prioritizes meritocracy and it can discourage underbidding. But this model isn't flexible and it doesn't promote agile acquisition. It's feasible, but it doesn't give us the short-term outcomes we want because we can't apply this to current contracts. Next slide, please. As the ADM of strategy has already said about our objectives that are important to us, we recommend implementing a risk pooling system that we described earlier. Risk pooling promotes accountability because it encourages contractors to manage costs effectively, knowing that all the cost overruns will be shared between them and the government. It promotes agile acquisition because it incentivizes efficient and cost-effective practices, which leads to more flexible procurement. It also is feasible, and in the short term, this is how we can show Canadians right away that we are working towards a better procurement future while also changing current contracts. Now I'll pass it on to the Minister of Project Management, Paige, to see what implementation will look like. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Our policy implementation involves two parts happening simultaneously. The formal review will be started right away as we implement the risk pooling strategy as our short-term action to immediately assume control over existing and incoming IT procurement projects. You can just go back to the previous slide, please. The formal review will happen over a 3-month period. As my colleague Freya mentioned, it is necessary not to waste more time and money with a long drawn-out review process. In regards to the risk pooling strategy, within the first month, the internal SSC team will be assembled and interdepartmental communications will be conducted. Vendors will also be informed of the impending changes to the procurement system. The SSC legal team will be given a timeline of 5 weeks to complete the risk pooling clause that will be added to contracts of vendors that volunteer to opt into risk pooling. This clause will be added to all new contracts moving forward. Contract negotiation will begin in the 3rd month, but will be an ongoing process as new contracts are awarded. A communications campaign with the public will be conducted in the 3rd month to provide assurance that action is taking place. This plan is operationally feasible as it uses already existing structures and resources. It is also financially feasible as the funding is coming from the reallocation of the already existing SSC budget. The Tiger team will be allocated $200,000, while the risk pooling strategy will be allocated $140,000. Next slide, please. This project requires a detailed communication plan for the many stakeholders. To Canadians, a Category 1 report, an accessible document targeted to the general public, will explain the review conducted by the Tiger team. The report will frame the new risk pooling strategy as a way to enhance transparency and accountability with ongoing and new contracts. This will be supplemented with specific talking points for parliamentarians when discussing with the media and during governmental inquiries. To the federal departments, a Category 3 report with a high-level and detailed explanation of the formal review and risk pooling will be provided. This will frame the initiative as aimed at seeking ways to improve interdepartmental procurement systems to enhance accountability and transparency. To SSC partners and departments, they will receive a Category 3 report that will emphasize our commitment to the agile procurement of technology solutions. To new and future vendors, a Category 2 business-oriented report will explain the report conclusions and new strategies to ensure them that we are supporting small and medium enterprises in having and equal opportunity in procurement. Next slide, please. In summary, our proposal includes formulating a Tiger team to work in collaboration with the Office of Procurement Ombud, and an external facilitator and an EDI consultant to conduct a meta-analysis on previously conducted reports. The information collected will assist in creating a long-term plan to improve the procurement process in SSC and serve as a model for other departments. In the short term, while the formal review is taking place, we propose implementing a risk pooling strategy to enhance accountability and control over current and future procurement projects and gain back public trust. On behalf of my team, we thank you for listening and we welcome any questions that you have.
Okay, well, thank you, Paige, and thank you to your colleagues as well. We are very interested, I am quite certain, in asking some further questions to get a little bit more detail. Philippe, would you please start us off?
Yes. Thank you very much for this very, very well taught presentation, very well delivered as well. My key interest is in outcomes. As you know, federal departments, they are under tremendous pressure to deliver a vast array of services to Canadians, and contracting is one of the key tools that they have in order to achieve those results for Canadians. Can you tell us a little more about how your approach has been taking in consideration the importance of achieving outcomes for key departments? And have you identified any risks that this approach may pose in terms of making sure that those outcomes are being achieved?
Thank you for that question. I think in terms of taking into account what you said, and given the situation that we're also observing in the news and what is happening in Parliament, we require that a timely response that is focused on delivering results is really important. I will first guide you through a little bit of our strategy in terms of how we've taken outcomes into account. And then I would kindly request the tech team to sort of take us into a particular slide so we can guide you through our risk assessment. So in terms of taking into account outcomes, so for instance, for the Tiger team review, the specific reason why we focused on a Tiger team comprising of experts from different departments is because we want to take into consideration the opinions and the challenges and the perspectives of these key critical players. And given the time constraints the federal government is facing, a timely response is really important, which is why our strategy is also designed over a 3-month period. And we do acknowledge that federal reviews tend to take longer, but public confidence is plummeting and tensions are rising. As a result, to show proactive action, we've designed a 3-month strategy. In terms of certain of the risks that we've accounted for, if I can kindly request the tech team to help us go into slide 20, please. As you can see, this is kind of the risk assessment that we mapped out in terms of what are some types of risk that could hinder us actually achieving the outcomes or the objectives that we've set out. And the 4 kinds of risks that we've taken into account are legal risks, financial risks, operational risk, and reputational risks. And we've also simultaneously designed mitigation strategies. Now, because your question was more outcome oriented, I'm going to focus on 2 different facets of the matrix. Firstly, in terms of the operational risks, we do agree that there might be medium-term operational risks in terms of the fact of quality assurance. Like you said, procurement is central to the operation of federal government, and it's a key activity. And as a result, we did account for the fact that if vendors provide low quality product, then that could sort of lead to more incurred costs. But then we've thought about our mitigation strategy where we could have like a stricter point rated criteria for appeals and dispute resolution. And I believe the TBS also has guidelines, and even the Office of Procurement Ombud has guidelines for how to deal with dispute resolution. In terms of reputational risk, which is what is most related to outcomes in the short term, we think that this is what is critical. And as a result, once again, our strategies try to reinforce the short-term range and the need for proactive and reactive strategies right now. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Patrick, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Great presentation. Thanks for this. I'm interested in a relationship with industry and implication of vendors in our procurement process, and how the the industry can help address this. I guess two questions for you. One is, as part of your review, as you said, critical from your analysis to go fast 3 months. Is there any intent or time in there to engage with industry to get their perspective? And then the second question would be on the risk pooling proposal. They're also interested in how whether you've engaged industry as you develop that option to get their feedback and see the appetite from industry to sign up to this approach, and what the impact potentially could be for industry.
I think as the ADM of Enterprise IT Procurement, I'll take the first part of the question, and then I will pass over to my colleague to address the risk pooling strategy. So in terms of your question about whether or not there is potential and space for engaging with industry officials, of course, there are a key piece in terms of how our strategy is accounted for. And maybe if we go into slide 19, please. So in your stakeholder analysis, you can see that we've also accounted for the vendors and the contractors, and also what kind of a reaction they might have to our potential strategy, which means that we do pay a key significance, or let's say key focus, on how these industry officials can basically be integrated into the process. However, that being said, the Tiger team that we've put together currently composes of selected officials from key procurement government agencies, simultaneously an external facilitator and an external EDI consultant. At this point of time, we have not accounted for industry officials within the Tiger team, but we believe that it is up to the Tiger team's discretion to deduce the need for such engagements, or to deduce the need for such communications if needed when the review is in progress. So that is in line with the first part of the question regarding industry officials. I will pass to my team to address the risk pooling question.
So thank you for your question about risk pooling. We won't engage too much with vendors because this was actually noted as an issue we saw in other departments where there were non-soliciting actors who were seen to be involved in the procurement process. But in terms of encouraging them to still sign up for this strategy, we will have, for current contractors, we will let them have all the cost savings. This is only for current contracts that have already been signed. For all future contracts, though, the cost savings will be pooled between the government and the contractor. And this will actually encourage people to engage in this procurement process, and it will encourage SMEs to participate because we are basing everything off of performance and how well they go under the budget. We will also use KPIs to see when, how well they meet the project milestones, how the quality of the deliverables, and how satisfied we are with the project. We also take into consideration stakeholder satisfaction with this whole process to see how we can change it as part of this agile process.
I would just like to add to that, and thank you so much, Elaine. We do, as part of our communications plan, we do have plans to release a Category 2 report to the vendors as well, and for our risk pooling strategy, so they will be informed on the updates, and then they can buy into the new plan if they already have contracts existing.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That's useful. Okay, Michelle, please. Uh-oh. We've lost Michelle.
Okay, there we go.
There she is.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Great presentation. I just wanted to go back to the beginning of your presentation. You had noted about 3 or 4 different issues, that you wanted to address. So you're focusing on 3 or 4 different issues. There was mismanagement of large-scale IT projects, transparency and accountability, ethics violations, etc. So I'm wondering how you chose, why you chose, I suppose, why you chose to focus on those three. Were there others that you considered? Did you do any type of like issues analysis to think of any other issues and help you decide why these were the ones that would have the most impact if you focused on them?
I can speak towards that. Yes, we did actually consider other policies. For example, we did consider a two-stage open book policy. It would have incorporated some of our current risk pooling strategies. However, it wasn't going to give our immediate impact that we wanted because it would have been a longer process in order to implement. We also did consider we considered having short-term contracts as well, because we saw that's one of the big issues with IT, these large-scale IT procurement projects, that they're such large-scale projects and their budgets are so big that whenever they do go off the rails, it's catastrophic. However, there was going to be multiple issues with current contracts if we tried to go that route. So we decided not to pursue that. Yeah, those are the main reasons why we decided to go with these current ones. They were smaller in scale, they were more practical, more feasible for the government to implement these ones, and those are really pertaining to our objectives from the beginning. So this is why we've highlighted the three policies that we have presented today.
No, thank you so much, Paula, for that. I think that provides a lot of ground for why we settled on the strategies that we did and why we think the path we've laid out is the most constructive one. But also touching back on your question, Michelle, regarding why we chose the issues of accountability, transparency, and the mismanagement. So when we started this entire process of problem solving, the first step that we did in that analysis was sort of mapping out what are the Auditor General reports saying right now. There have been all these departmental reviews that have been done by the Office of Procurement Ombudsman. What are those reports saying right now? That allowed us, and then we did that across all the departments, right? We looked at SSC, we looked at ESDC, we looked at RCMP, we looked at CBSA, and we tried to identify these common failures and we mapped them out based on those. And because specifically this case was asking for a short term, and we know we can't have our feet in two boats at the same time, we tried to distill down what are the key areas that the federal government can focus on right now. And then, as Paula mentioned, based on those issues, we contended different policies and rested on this one. So we considered a wide range of issues, but then given the trade-offs that federal governments often face in policymaking, we had to go with the three utmost ones that we saw as important and were common across all the departments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, both of you. That's very helpful.
Maybe time for one more quick one. And Donna, I might ask you about anything that you have thoughts-wise for feasibility.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Very well executed presentation. Given that you've identified, we talked about ArriveCan, the benefit modernization system, the Phoenix catastrophe, we well noted those. When you talk about adding penalties, risk pooling, what would you say to the fact that in these industries, there's some very small vendors that are able to produce these? And what would you say to them? We're limiting the pool even more by adding risk, given that, again, these are some things that Canada has to implement. What would you say to the fact that we're narrowing our ability and maybe turning so many vendors off that they don't bid at all? Just that possibility. What would you say to that?
I can answer that question, part of that question. I just want to say that the risk pooling will actually encourage people to join the procurement process, and it will increase competition because contractors will be rewarded based on their quality of work and how well they meet the project milestones according to their defined benchmark according to our defined benchmark. And even though we cannot prevent risk pooling from being added to the cost of bids, large procurement projects in the UK have found that this method has been really effective in increasing competition and reducing the risk of cost overruns and resulting in savings of 10 to 20% per project and finishing the project ahead of time as well.
Thank you, Elaine.
All right, I am quite sure that we are at time. Thank you very much. The amount of work that's gone in is very clear. We appreciate very much the brief that you have given to us, and we thank you for it. And we hope that you have an excellent rest of the day.